I'm Tessa, 31 years old, and recently promoted to Senior Financial Controller at Weston Logistics, one of the fastest growing distribution companies in the Midwest. I manage 7 accounts, oversee a $14 million annual budget, and just earned a $15,000 performance bonus after leading a successful audit that exposed a tax discrepancy, saving the firm nearly $300,000. I know that sounds impressive, but in my family, email, it barely registered. Before I continue, let me know in the comments what part of the world you're watching from. Also subscribe because another story drops tomorrow. Growing up, my family ran a small hardware store that my grandfather started after World War II. Weston Tools. It was never glamorous. Dusty aisles, aging shelves, but it paid the bills and gave my dad a purpose. Or so I thought. My older brother Kyle always had a different relationship with the business. Dad called him the heir, Mom called him the brain, but Kyle had never stuck around long enough to actually run the store. He'd work a summer, disappear for a year, come back when he needed cash, or when some half-baked startup failed. Yet, at every holiday gathering or family reunion, he was the one my parents paraded around like royalty. Kyle works in tech. Kyle's got investments. Kyle might franchise the store, can you imagine? Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. The quiet one. The daughter who brought spreadsheets to Thanksgiving to help Dad manage inventory costs. The one who filed his late taxes 3 years in a row without ever being asked. I never needed applause, but I did expect honesty. That's why, when my parents invited me to the 40th anniversary of Weston Tools, a reunion of sorts, filled with cousins, uncles, old customers, and neighborhood friends, I thought maybe, finally, they'd acknowledge what I'd done. Not publicly, but at least privately. Dad called it a legacy celebration. "Everyone's coming home," he said. "You should be there, Tess. You're part of this too." I agreed, even took a Friday off work to help Mom bake her famous lemon tarts. I brought a framed copy of my grandfather's original business license, which I'd found while digitizing old family files. It was dusty, curled at the edges, and beautiful. A piece of history. I even printed some updated financial charts showing the improvements we'd made together over the last decade. Yes, we. Because although I wasn't technically on payroll, I'd been managing parts of the store's back end for years, quietly cleaning up bookkeeping, filing quarterly tax reports, optimizing vendor contracts. No one had asked me to, I just couldn't watch them drown. But when I pulled into the community center that Saturday afternoon, I sensed something was off. The parking lot was full. Too full. Dozens of folding chairs were set up in rows outside. Balloons in red and gray. The store's colors bobbed in the wind. A printed banner read, "Celebrating 40 years. Thanks to the man who funded it all." I figured it must be about Grandpa, maybe some tribute speech. But as I walked in, I saw Kyle at the front of the room, holding a microphone and grinning like a politician on the campaign trail. Mom stood beside him beaming. Dad sat behind him, looking unusually stiff in his Sunday suit. "Tessa's here!" someone called out. I waved, my smile unsure. Kyle's eyes flicked toward me, and for a split second, something cold passed between us. Then he smiled wider. He tapped the mic. "Before we continue, I just want to give a special shout-out to my baby sister, Tessa. You all know she's been a rock in this family. Brilliant, organized, always bringing structure to the chaos. But today isn't about spreadsheets." He chuckled. "It's about heart, about taking risks, about believing in the family business when no one else would." I blinked. What was he talking about? Kyle turned back to the crowd. 10 years ago, Weston Tools was struggling. The economy was in the tank and foot traffic was dying. We didn't know if we'd survive. That's when I stepped in. Wait, what? I took a chance. I poured everything I had into this place. I kept it afloat. I reinvested my own capital, even skipped paychecks, just to make sure our legacy didn't die with a bad quarter, Aunt Linda gasped. Mom clutched his arm. That's why today, I'm proud to announce that as of this year, we've not only stabilized, but profited. And we're on track to open a second location, right here in Greenfield. The room erupted in applause. People stood. Dad looked down at his shoes. I stood frozen near the punch table, holding a plate of lemon tarts like a child at the wrong birthday party. Kyle had never invested in the store. Not once. I knew that for a fact. I'd seen the books. I was the books. I wasn't just the emotional support, I was the emergency accountant, the financial advisor, the budgetary triage unit. And now, in front of 90 people, Kyle had rewritten our history. No one even questioned it. In fact, they started thanking him. Great Aunt Clara sobbed during her toast. We almost lost Weston Tools, but Kyle kept it alive for all of us. I stared at my father, waiting for him to say something, to clarify, to correct. But he just nodded along, not proud, not even relieved, just compliant. That was when I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a cover-up. And that meant only one thing. If they were rewriting the past, it was up to me to remind them what actually happened. And I knew exactly how I'd do it. I went to my car, opened my laptop, and logged into the QuickBooks account I'd been secretly managing for 5 years. Not for me, for them. I pulled the backup files, printed out the general ledger summaries, highlighted every payment made from my bank account to theirs, every overdraft I'd quietly covered, every vendor bill I'd paid from my own emergency fund. And one entry in particular caught my eye. A deposit made 9 years ago, when Kyle was supposedly saving the store. It was for $23.76. He'd bought pizza for the team and called it an investment. I smiled. Let the reunion continue, I thought. Let the guests eat cake. Because by the end of the day, the only thing they'd be celebrating was the truth. By the time I returned to the reunion with a folder full of printed bank statements, no one noticed I'd been gone. The music had started up. Someone hired a DJ who thought a hardware store's anniversary called for 80s rock and beer-themed country ballads. Plates clattered, people laughed, and Kyle, he was being handed a plaque. Mom held it up, proudly. In honor of your unwavering dedication and investment in our family legacy, Weston Tools thanks you, Kyle Weston. More applause. Kyle made a humble face. You know the type. Eyebrows raised, chin dipped, hands on his chest as if to say, "Me? Really?" I stood at the edge of the crowd, my stomach turning. He'd always been a performer. Growing up, he told elaborate lies about scholarships he never won, coding boot camps he never finished, and startups that almost got acquired. And somehow, Mom and Dad always found a way to believe him. This time, though, he dragged the family name into his fantasy. I scanned the room for Dad, found him nursing a ginger ale by the caterer's table. Alone. I walked over slowly, careful not to attract attention, and sat in the folding chair beside him. He glanced at me, then quickly away. "You knew?" I said quietly. He sipped his drink. "Your mother thought it would be easier this way." My heart thudded. Easier than what? Telling the truth? He said nothing. I opened the manila folder in my lap and pulled out the first sheet. A wire transfer receipt. From me. $1,500. Dated May 4th. 9 years ago. The day their utility payment bounced. "You remember this?" I asked. He didn't look. "Your power was about to be cut off. Kyle was in Oregon, launching some failed crypto thing. I wired this from my personal account. Still nothing. So I laid out another. Vendor ledger showing Weston Tools' monthly rent had been quietly paid by me for 7 months in 2017, while Dad recovered from surgery. I even had the memo, covering March. Don't worry about it. He didn't speak, but I saw the wince. Then I pulled out the chart. 5 years of cash flow improvements, all stemming from changes I'd implemented. Bulk ordering, vendor consolidation, service upgrades. At the bottom of the page, signed, Tessa Weston, consultant, unpaid. "Tell me again," I said, voice trembling, "how Kyle saved this business." Dad's mouth opened, then closed. Finally, a whisper. "You don't understand the pressure." Pressure? I nearly laughed. I was 23, working 2 jobs, barely paying my student loans. And I still sent you money. Because I believed in this place. Because I believed in you. He exhaled slowly, staring straight ahead. "Your brother needed a win." I froze. There it was. Not the business needed saving. Not we were desperate. Just Kyle needed a win. Dad continued, quietly. After everything he's tried, the flops, the loans, people were starting to talk. We thought, if he could just have this one moment, feel like a man again. By stealing mine? I didn't shout it. I didn't need to. The fury in my voice sliced clean and sharp. Dad turned to face me then. Really looked at me. Like he hadn't seen me before. Like he was seeing his daughter not as the steady fallback, the invisible fixer, but as the woman who'd kept his dreams alive while he applauded someone else. You're right, he said finally. It was so soft I almost missed it. You're right, he repeated. But it's too late. Everyone thinks. Then it's time they heard something new. I stood, folder in hand, and walked straight toward the mic. It's funny how silence can become deafening. Kyle was mid-story, something about a strategic partnership he was brokering with a regional chain, when I stepped beside him and tapped the mic gently. He paused, confused. People turned. Dad didn't move. Mom looked confused at first, then worried. Hi, everyone, I said, smiling gently. I won't take long. I just wanted to add something to today's celebration. Kyle's face froze. I've loved Weston Tools my whole life. It's where I learned how to measure twice and cut once. Where I scraped my knees on old linoleum floors while stocking shelves after school. Where I balanced my first ledger. Some people smiled, nostalgic. I'm proud of my grandfather, Frank Weston, for founding it. And I'm proud of my dad for keeping it alive through 2 recessions. I paused, glancing at Dad. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. But the truth is, this business was never saved by one person. It survived because people quietly showed up, even when no one clapped for them. I raised the folder. This file contains records, bank transfers, vendor payments, strategic audits, and 5 years of financial interventions, none of which came from Kyle. The room stilled. I opened the folder and held out the top page. This is a receipt for a $3,000 emergency plumbing repair dated during Kyle's so-called investment year. Paid by me. Kyle stepped forward, trying to grab the mic. I pulled it back. Sit down. He hesitated, but my voice was calm, unshakable. The room knew it too. You've all applauded a story that never happened, but you should know who actually kept this place alive. I didn't need to say more. I handed the mic to the DJ and walked away, leaving the papers on the table. Kyle's face was pale. Mom's mouth hung open. And Dad? Dad finally stood. Not to clap. Not to defend me. Just to watch, silently. As I walked out of the party he let be built on a lie. You ever walk away from something so loud, so heavy with emotion, that the silence afterward feels like a scream? That was me, in the parking lot of the Greenfield Community Center. The sun's still high, but the air colder than it should have been. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before starting the engine. Just breathing. The adrenaline was gone. The satisfaction? Still there, but buried under a strange weight. Not regret, no, but something adjacent. Like grief. Because what I exposed back there? Docs. It wasn't just Kyle's lie. It was the truth about us. About a family that rewarded performance over contribution. Flash over substance. Emotionally, I'd always been the foundation they stood on. Quiet, steady, always prepared. Kyle had always been the flame. Dazzling, unpredictable, blinding. Guess which one everyone clapped for? Yeah. That night, I turned off my phone. No texts, no calls, no explanations. Let them sit with it. Let them sit in my silence for once. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, curled up on my couch, and did something I hadn't done in years. I rewatched old home videos, back when Grandpa Frank was still alive, when Weston Tools was nothing but a narrow storefront. with one register and 2 shelves of screws. There was a clip of me, age 12, sorting receipts on the floor while Grandpa laughed from behind the counter. "Someday," he said to the camera, "this one will run circles around all of us." He winked. That one line undid me, not because it hurt, but because it reminded me who I'd always been. Not a backup plan, not a footnote in Kyle's highlight reel, but the one who built the safety net they all took for granted. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I was going to prove it. The next morning, I returned to my laptop. No more bank statements. This time, I pulled something else. Emails. All the ones Dad had sent over the past 5 years asking for quick help. Invoices forwarded with, "Can you look at this?" Old passwords. System logins. Even QuickBooks access requests. They weren't just casual favors. They were a paper trail, a record of administrative labor, unpaid consulting, and back-end support, all invisible unless you chose to see it. I started drafting a letter. Not to my family, to their accountant. See, Weston Tools was small enough not to have an in-house finance person, but they did have a CPA named Paul Greaves who filed their business taxes. And Paul and I? We'd met at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon 2 years ago. He'd even emailed me once to ask if I was available for part-time contracting. I declined, conflict of interest, but I remembered him being sharp and ethical. I wrote, "Hi, Paul. This is Tessa Weston. I know you handle filings for Weston Tools. I wanted to alert you to a misrepresentation made publicly at an event yesterday where my brother Kyle claimed to be the sole financial backer of the business. Given that I have personally contributed funds, managed back-end finances, and maintained ledger systems over the past 5 years, unpaid, I wanted to make sure future filings reflect actual inputs, not fictional ones. Please let me know if you'd like access to my documentation. I'd be happy to forward it along. Regards, Tessa." I read it 3 times before hitting send. Professional, calm, unmistakable. Then I BCC'd myself. Let the facts breathe on their own. Blank underscore blank. By mid-morning, the phone calls resumed. First, from Mom. I let it ring. Then a string of texts from Kyle. "Tessa, we need to talk. You embarrassed Dad. You ruined what could have been a great moment for the business." For the business? I rolled my eyes. 10 minutes later, a voicemail from Dad. "What you did was unnecessary. You made your point, but you also made things difficult. For everyone." Unbelievable. I pressed play again just to hear the tone, and that's when I realized something. He didn't sound angry. He sounded exposed. Kyle's legend didn't just boost Kyle, it protected Dad. If the world believed Kyle saved Weston Tools, then Dad didn't have to admit who really needed saving, didn't have to admit who really showed up. My silence had shielded them both for years. Now that it was gone? She crimmy. The truth had space to echo. That afternoon, Paul replied, "Tessa, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I was not aware of the extent of your involvement, and yes, I would appreciate any documentation you're willing to share. For transparency and compliance, it's important we correctly reflect all financial contributions and operational labor. Best, Paul Greaves, CPA." I smiled. Then attached every receipt, every ledger, every date-stamped email from Dad asking for help. Let the IRS see what they needed to see. Let the truth live on paper. Around 7:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole inside. Kyle. Wearing a blazer. No doubt trying to look like the man he pretended to be yesterday. I opened the door. Just enough to block his path. He smiled like nothing happened. "Tess, can we talk?" "Talk then," he shifted. "Look, I know yesterday got a little heated. But come on. It was just a speech. No need to." "Lie," he flinched. "You stood in front of our family and claimed credit for a decade of work you didn't do," I said calmly. "You stole more than a story. You tried to rewrite history." His smile faded. I was just trying to help Dad, he muttered. He's been so down lately. He needed someone to be proud of. He already had someone. I stepped back, and he ignored her. Kyle looked at the ground. You humiliated him. No, I said, crossing my arms. I corrected him. He looked up, something mean flickering in his eyes. You always were dramatic, and you always needed applause. We stood in silence. He finally said, So what now? You gonna sue the family business? I raised an eyebrow. You think this is about revenge? He didn't answer, so I leaned forward, just slightly. This is about respect. The kind that doesn't need a mic, or a banner, or a plaque. I closed the door. This time, he didn't knock again. By Monday morning, the phone calls turned to emails. Paul Greaves, the accountant, asked if I'd be willing to join a brief call, along with my father and Kyle, to clarify reporting expectations. His language was polite, but the subtext? Unmistakable. This was no longer just a family issue, it was a compliance issue. I agreed, happily. We scheduled the meeting for Wednesday at 10 a.m. 30 minutes, 3 voices, 1 truth. On Tuesday, I received another email, this one from Claire Matheson, a local journalist I vaguely remembered from high school. She now ran the Greenfield Ledger, a small-town paper that occasionally featured local business milestones. She wrote, Hi Tessa, I attended the Weston Tools anniversary event on Saturday and was intrigued by your brief but powerful remarks. I had been preparing a piece on family-run businesses in transition, and after witnessing the events firsthand, I'd love to include your perspective. Let me know if you'd be open to a short interview. Best, Claire. At first, I considered declining, but then I remembered Kyle's speech. The fake narrative, now likely echoing through dozens of family circles and community Facebook groups. A public lie required a public correction. I agreed to the interview. Wednesday afternoon, right after the call with the accountant. The morning of the meeting, I dressed intentionally. Not in a blazer or anything showy. Just a soft blue blouse, the one that always made me feel calm and capable, and a delicate silver pendant that had once belonged to Grandpa Frank. For luck, I told myself. At 9:59 a.m., I joined the Zoom call. Kyle was already there, hair slicked back, suit too tight. Dad joined a few seconds later, face stiff and unreadable. Paul greeted us all with neutral professionalism. Thank you for making time today. I'll keep this brief. There's a discrepancy between what was publicly stated at the Weston Tools anniversary event and what has been reflected in the business's financial records. He turned to me. Tessa, I reviewed the documents you sent. They were detailed and time-stamped. I can confirm multiple personal financial contributions and operational services rendered to Weston Tools under your name. He paused. Mr. Weston, can you confirm these records match your understanding? Dad cleared his throat. Yes, she's helped. A lot. Probably more than we gave her credit for. Paul nodded. And Kyle, just to clarify, have you ever made formal capital investments into the business? Contributions recorded in our books? Kyle's jaw tightened. No, but that doesn't mean I didn't help. Paul maintained his steady tone. Of course, but from a reporting standpoint, we can't assign operational credit or tax advantages to non-documented involvement, so I'll be updating our records accordingly. He turned back to me. And, if you'd like, I can file a memorandum of contributions with your signature, outlining the past 5 years of support. Yes, please, I said. And, he added gently, it may also be wise for the business to issue a corrected public statement, especially given the video circulating from the event. My heart jumped. Video? Oh, yes, Paul said, eyes briefly flicking toward Kyle. Someone uploaded the entire speech. And your rebuttal. It's making the rounds. I muted myself briefly and typed Weston Tools anniversary into the search bar. The first result? Sister destroys brother's lies about family business in front of 90 relatives Greenfield drama. 53,000 views. Comments disabled. I exhaled, so it was out there. The truth didn't just echo now, it amplified. When I unmuted, Kyle had disconnected, Dad stayed another few seconds, then said, barely above a whisper, "I didn't know it would go this far." I looked at him. It already was this far. You just never noticed. Claire Matheson arrived at my apartment at 2 p.m. She was sharp, polite, and kind in a way that disarmed me instantly. She didn't lead with hard questions. Instead, she asked about Grandpa Frank. "What do you remember about the early days?" I smiled. "Grease under his fingernails. And a broom handle he'd use to point at items from across the store." She laughed. And we eased into it. Eventually, she asked about the reunion. "What made you speak up, Tessa?" I hesitated, then told her the truth. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about being erased. She nodded slowly, letting the weight of it settle. "Do you think you'll ever work in the business formally?" I shook my head. "No, I have a career I'm proud of. And I don't want to manage people who spent 10 years pretending I didn't exist." "But you still care about the business?" "Of course," I said. "It's part of my blood. But legacy doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity to keep someone else's lie intact." She wrote that down. "Can I quote you on that?" "Yes." The article dropped on Friday. Headline: "Not just the golden boy. How one woman quietly saved her family business, then watched her brother take the credit." It was fair, detailed, and, surprisingly, compassionate. Claire didn't sensationalize. She just told the truth. She quoted me extensively, but also interviewed old vendors and neighbors who remembered my quiet work behind the scenes. One even recalled, "Tessa used to drop off lunch for the staff when Kyle didn't show up for shifts." By Saturday, my LinkedIn inbox had exploded. HR professionals, former classmates, even a regional news station asking if I'd speak on a segment about family businesses. I declined that one. But it felt good. Not fame. Just clarity. Like for once, the invisible became visible. Sunday morning, Mom finally called. I answered. Because I was ready, she didn't cry, didn't beg, just said, "We'd like you to come over for dinner." I said nothing. Just us. No speeches, no banners, no Kyle. I exhaled. "All right," I said, "but I bring the wine." She chuckled. "Bring 2 bottles." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, the real family business was finally beginning. And this time, the books were balanced. Dinner was set for 6 p.m. Sunday evening. Not the usual chaos of family gatherings. Just 3 chairs at the kitchen table and a pork roast that smelled faintly like apology. I wore neutral colors. I brought 2 bottles of Pinot Noir, one for the table, one for what I suspected would be needed later. When I arrived, Mom looked softened, not tearful, not defiant, just older. She hugged me like she used to, before years of quiet resentment turned every embrace into performance. Dad was already at the table, fork in hand, not speaking. I took the seat opposite him. The silence was mutual. Dinner began quietly. A few comments about the weather, a neutral question about my job, but eventually the thing we didn't want to say filled the space between bites. Until Mom broke. "I never should have let him speak," she said. No one asked who she meant. "We just thought it would be nice for Kyle to feel useful." That word, useful, it twisted something inside me. "He's not useless," I said softly, "but pretending he built something he didn't only cheapens the thing itself." Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't mean to take anything from you." I looked at him, eyes steady. "You didn't take anything. I gave, over and over. But the moment you let him erase it, that's when you lost the right to call it generosity." Mom reached for her glass, then stopped. "We were wrong." That simple. 3 words. No excuses. It didn't undo anything. But it didn't have to. That night wasn't about restoring the past. It was about setting the tone for what came next. Over the next week, the fallout continued, though not the kind I expected. Kyle stayed silent. He didn't reach out. No rage texts, no phony apologies, just silence. Until I received an envelope at work, hand-delivered by courier, no return address. Inside, a single check, made out to me. Amount, $2,376. Memo, for the pizza and the lies. I laughed. Loudly. It wasn't repayment, not really. But it was something. Kyle's version of surrender. Or shame. Or maybe just an acknowledgement that he'd been caught. Whatever it was, I deposited it. Not for the money, but for the symbolism. Because for once, he gave something back. Later that month, Paul emailed again. The final quarter filings for Weston Tools were submitted with an attached addendum. It read, Note on operational oversight, 2016 to 2021. Unpaid consulting services and documented financial contributions were made by Tessa Weston during this period. These efforts were critical in maintaining business continuity and solvency during economic downturns. It wasn't a headline, it wasn't a banner at a party. But it was in ink, permanent. I cried when I read it, quietly, at my desk, alone. Because the older I get, the more I realize. Recognition doesn't need an audience. Sometimes it just needs to be true. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. Employees at Weston Tools started reaching out. One emailed me about a missing W-2. Another asked how to track reimbursements. Apparently, Dad's record-keeping had slipped since I stepped away. I offered help, but only in writing and only for specific questions. No logins, no access, no free audits. Boundaries weren't just principles anymore. They were policies. A few weeks later, Mom called again. We're thinking of stepping back, she said. From the store? Yes, just getting older. We'd like to train someone new to take over daily operations. I waited. Then she added, We thought maybe you could help us find someone, not be the someone. I laughed. She got it now. Progress. We set up a meeting. She brought spreadsheets. Actual spreadsheets. Printed, color-coded, and surprisingly well-organized. Turns out, after decades of brushing off my systems, she'd started mimicking them. I offered a few names, local business grads, a former intern of mine, and suggested they offer part-time pay and clear responsibilities. I'm not letting you work for free again, I said. She nodded. No protest. The change wasn't flashy, it was quiet. But this time, it was also respectful. Then came the family barbecue. Every June, the Westons held a backyard gathering with loud music, undercooked burgers, and at least one cousin trying to pitch a pyramid scheme. I debated skipping it, but Olivia, the cousin I actually liked, texted me, Come, I want to see you, and I'm bringing deviled eggs. Fine. For deviled eggs, I'd endure anything. When I arrived, people acted different. Not awkward, not standoffish, just measured. A few came up quietly to say they'd seen the article. One even said, I wish I'd had the guts to do what you did. No mention of Kyle, none needed. Halfway through the day, Uncle Jim tapped his solo cup and said, Here's to Tessa, who kept Weston Tools alive when no one was watching. The group raised their drinks. My mom clapped. Even Dad gave a short nod. I smiled, raising my own glass, and didn't say a word. Because, for once, silence was enough. There's a moment, after a storm breaks and the wind finally stops, when you look around and realize nothing's exactly where it was, but it's not all broken either. That's what the months after the barbecue felt like. Everything shifted, but not everything shattered. Kyle kept his distance. He didn't return to the store, didn't show up for Labor Day, didn't even send one of his signature big plans coming soon emails to the family group chat. In fact, the only trace of him appeared 2 months later on LinkedIn, pursuing independent ventures in sustainable commerce, which, in Kyle speak, could mean anything from a crypto coin to a resale shop in someone's garage. I didn't comment, didn't like the post, didn't clap back. I had my proof. I had my piece. I didn't need an audience anymore. Meanwhile, something interesting happened at Weston Tools. After years of barely hanging on, the business actually began to stabilize, ironically, after I stopped being its secret spine. Because this time, my parents had to learn what it really meant to delegate, to hire smart, to pay people what they were worth. They brought in a young manager named Ray, a former warehouse coordinator who took the job like it was a mission. She called me within her first week. Your mom said you'd built a lot of their ordering systems? I did. Well, they're not documented anywhere. Want to grab coffee and help me decode the mess? I liked her already. We met. 1 coffee turned into 2 hours. I walked her through everything: vendor negotiation tips, supply chain tweaks, even the color coding system I'd once used to help Dad track seasonal demand. But before I left, I made it clear. "This is yours now," I said. "No rescue missions from me." She nodded. "I don't want a savior. I want a partner." Fair. She had the keys now. I had my freedom. Back in my own life, things moved forward. That $15,000 bonus, the one Kyle tried to turn into his legacy, ended up funding a deposit on a cozy 2-bedroom loft near the city. Bright light, tall windows, zero emotional baggage. The second bedroom? I turned it into a creative office. Not just for work, for legacy. Because something had shifted in me after the article, after the speech, after the ripple of comments and DMs from strangers who said, "This is what happened in my family too." I thought I was the only one. I've always been the invisible one. Turns out I wasn't alone. Turns out this wasn't just a Weston story, it was a pattern. So I started writing. Quietly. Just reflections, notes, lessons. I called the folder The Family Ledger. Not a book yet, not a podcast, not a business, but something. Something mine. The more distance I gained, the more I saw it clearly. The betrayal hadn't started at the reunion. It started the first time someone said, "Kyle has potential," while I was cleaning up his mess. It started when being dependable was treated like a default setting, not a choice. And it had lasted so long because I allowed it, over and over, out of love, guilt, fear. But now? Now I loved without enabling, gave without erasing myself. And I feared nothing. One rainy Sunday in November, I visited Grandpa Frank's grave. I hadn't been in a while. The headstone was simple. Frank Weston, builder, dreamer, father. I wiped the leaves off the base, crouched beside the grass, and whispered, "They tried to rewrite the story, Grandpa, but I set the record straight." I paused. "I think you'd be proud." A breeze passed through the trees. Nothing dramatic, but real. Thanksgiving rolled around fast. This time, the invitation came in a group text that I was included in from the start. No surprises, no hidden agendas, no last-minute ambushes. Just a family meal. They even asked me to bring dessert. Mom said she was finally ready to try my butterscotch pie recipe. During dinner, Olivia gave a toast. "For my cousin Tessa," she said, raising her glass, "who taught me that truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is a kind of love. And that boundaries don't push people away. They give them space to show up better." Everyone clinked glasses, even Dad. Later, as I helped clear plates, he came up behind me, drying his hands on a towel. "You were right," he said softly. "I didn't ask what part." He clarified anyway. "All of it." I turned. That's a big admission for a man who once told me investing in QuickBooks was a waste of good whiskey money. He chuckled. "Yeah, well, you taught us better." It wasn't a speech, wasn't public, but it was the kind of truth that sticks, the kind I used to beg for. Now it came freely. Because I'd stopped asking and started requiring. Christmas came with snow that year, not just flurries. The full cinematic kind, blanketing sidewalks, softening rooftops, giving even the roughest streets a postcard finish. I spent the morning in my loft, mug of cinnamon coffee in hand, watching it fall. No drama, no urgent calls, no financial fires to put out, just quiet, real quiet, the kind that meant peace, not avoidance. Later that day, I stopped by my parents' place for dinner. A small gathering. Olivia, her husband, my parents, a niece who now gripped things with the ferocity of a lawyer cross-examining a hostile witness. Her name was Emily. Not my idea, but somehow still perfect. Olivia asked me to hold her as they brought out dessert. I cradled her in my arms, this tiny, demanding, full of opinion little girl, and I whispered, "You're going to know your worth from day one. I'll make sure of it." She blinked, then sneezed in my face. Fair. Legacy takes time. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside. He handed me a small box. I opened it. Inside, a vintage brass calculator. One of those old-school click-clack ones Grandpa used to keep in the shop. "It still works," he said. I had it restored. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't. He added, "Your grandfather used it to run numbers the week he opened the store." Wow. He always said it belonged to the person who kept the business alive, not just the one who started it. He looked at me, eyes glassy. "I was wrong, Tessa. I let someone else take your credit. Because it was easier than facing what I'd missed. And I'm sorry." I nodded, lips pressed tight. Not because I didn't accept it, but because if I said anything, I'd cry. And I wanted to remember this moment clearly. Not through tears, but through truth. 2 weeks later, I got an email. Subject line, "We'd like to feature your story." It was from a national business magazine. They were running a feature on invisible architects, the people behind successful ventures who rarely get the spotlight. Apparently, Claire Matheson's article had gone further than I realized. They wanted to fly me out, do a full photo shoot, a profile. I said yes, not because I needed the recognition, but because someone else might read it. Someone sitting in a small business office, being erased by a louder sibling, a charming cousin, a narcissistic parent. And maybe they'd see my story and realize, you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, you're just finally choosing to be seen. A month later, the piece went live. It was called "The Ledger Keeper: How One Woman Quietly Saved Her Family's Legacy, Then Reclaimed Her Place in It." There were pictures, quotes, a pull-out line that read, "Some people inherit legacies. Others build them silently until the world finally takes notice." It went viral. But that wasn't the best part. The best part came 3 weeks after publication. An envelope arrived at Weston Tools. Inside was a letter from a retired businesswoman in Connecticut. She had once owned a chain of stationery stores and read my article in her waiting room. It said, "Dear Tessa, you reminded me that being invisible doesn't mean being unimportant. You reminded me that work done in the dark still deserves light. You reminded me that a name on the deed isn't the only kind of ownership that matters. Thank you." It was signed, Eleanor Marsh, founder Marsh Paper and Company, Est, 1965. 1 year after the reunion, Kyle reappeared. He sent a message. No subject line, no punctuation. Just, "I see you're famous now, congrats. Guess I should have kept better records." I didn't reply, because by then, I no longer needed anything from him. Not recognition, not regret, not even revenge. The story was written. In ink. In memory. In records. And best of all, in my name. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that silence can be just as damaging as a lie. Every time I let someone rewrite my story for the sake of peace, I lost a little piece of myself. But the moment I spoke up, when I put facts above feelings and truth above tradition, I didn't just reclaim my place in the family. I reclaimed my identity. So if you've ever felt like the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who held everything together while someone else got the credit, you're not alone. You're not invisible. And you don't need permission to speak up. Tell your story, set your boundary, print the receipts if you have to. And most of all, never let someone else narrate your legacy. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow I'm sharing another story that proves quiet power doesn't mean weak. It means undeniable.